Howdy, friends, and welcome to The Storyfield. This is a podcast where we talk about business, faith, and life in general.
Okay, so here's the deal. We want you to be encouraged. We want you living in hope. This life we live is complex. It's hard at times. At The Storyfield, you will find great stories of normal people just like us who will inspire you. Our goal is that you leave encouraged, inspired, and excited to move forward in life. But before we get started, one thing though, if you're listening and you find yourself really hopeless right now, send us an email at hope@thestoryfield.com so we can pray for you. Thanks for joining us today. Let's get started.
Hey, Storyfield. This voice is different. This is Micah. Josh is probably trotting the globe fishing right now, but I have a friend, a pastor, a buddy. His name is Todd Dionne. He is joining us today on The Storyfield. Welcome, Todd.
Hi, Micah. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to answer your questions and share my story, maybe of life, business, and faith. Hopefully, I'll be able to help inspire someone out there who might be on a similar journey. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Dude, I'm so excited. We have known each other for 6, 7, 8 years. He was my pastor. He was my boss. But he actually does a lot of things. So I mentioned he is a pastor. He knows a bunch of stuff about real estate. He plays a pretty wicked guitar, especially if it's purple.
That you now own, right?
I do own a purple guitar, yeah.
That you bought from me.
And then I had some kind of Invisired. You're helping people with their health goals. I don't know. We're going to get all into that. I am going to ask one question, though, because I've always wanted to know this. Who is the greatest guitarist of all time?
No.
In your mind. I know.
You're going to start with this, and I'm going to... all these musicians out here that are listening, I'm just going to lose all of them.
Well, it's not like... Okay, who is your greatest guitarist influence? Let's put it that.
Okay.
Then people won't get upset and give you hate mail. And
well, I think overall, just like if I was just like the solo artist, right? The solo guitarist, someone like Joe Satriani, who's been so influential, probably in that area. He's probably one of my all-time favorites. And then you have guys from just all different eras that have been so influential on me as a guitar player. And it's just, I'm all over the place. So I honestly cannot, when it comes to bands and things like that, I just have so many favorites. I can't just isolate. I mean, I can go from what really influenced me when I first started playing guitar. What was the album that said, I feel that, I want to do that? It was AC/DC's Back in Black.
Oh, yeah.
And that album had been out forever by the time I got my hands on it. But I heard that and I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to do this. And that really inspired me to pick up the guitar. And then, of course, you have our era of growing up in the 80s, Def Leppard, Bon Jovi, probably my favorite all-time, Motley Crue. Got to stick with the Crew on, they had so many great albums and stuff while they were together. And there's just so many others. There's Van Halen, Eddie Van Halen, of course. So, man, I could just go on. I love it all. That's the thing that it makes me hard to even identify myself as a musician because I love so many different guitarists and styles of music and I have so many influences there. I'm kind of spastic when it comes to that.
Yeah, I think I am too. Like, I grew up in Houston, so for us, it was always in the rock era. It was King's X. Of course, then you got Steve Ray Vaughan and Eric Johnson and all of these guys. And then I realized pretty early that I was not going to be a good electric guitar player because I couldn't even play acoustic very good. I could just play the 5 or 6 country chords. And then there's this thing called the capo, and people used to give me crap about it all the time because I couldn't figure out how to do bar chords. So, yeah, I've played capo on the 6th fret.
Yep,
which doesn't sound
we
very
all
good.
We all have it one time or another. So,
all right. Well, I figured I'd throw that one out first just to annoy you.
Good job.
But let's get started. What we like to do here on the Storyfield is give people kind of like a a timeline of how basically your story of how it started. So kind of like where you grew up, what your family was like, if you had brothers and sisters, if what you did in high school, those kinds of things.
Oh man. Okay. Well, I'll tell you, I grew up in a very rural area, and that's about 2 hours south of Atlanta, Georgia, a little town called Warm Springs, Georgia, and there was nothing there. It was the outdoors, and that's all you had, unless you drove an hour to one of the other cities around you to do something, which we never did in the 80s. You just did what you lived with where you were, and you played where you were. So I always had this kind of freestyle lifestyle when I was a kid. There were, like many of us Gen X who grew up in the 80s, we didn't have parents in the house. They were both working most of the time. And I kid with people now. It's like, man, I was raised by the pack. It was my friends. It's like we were together all the time. We were fishing, we were camping, we were riding our ATVs, motorcycles out all day. It was, in that time, the parents were like, hey, just be back home darkish.
Yeah, street light
time, like, okay. And then, just out running the countryside. And we had this river road, which is like this long, like 2 mile stretch of road. And there were, lots of families on that road and kids my age. And so we were just out all the time doing those types of things, messing around, getting in trouble. And I think it helped me develop a really connection to creation and nature. I just fell in love with it. It's where I feel most home at, honestly. And it also gave me a sense of awe. And I think it's one of the things that kind of moved me towards faith. It was one of those influences in my life as I started thinking about questions. But that came later on. But so I was like a little heathen, the first until I became a believer when I was 14. And man, woods, nature, adventure.
Is that where your love for fishing came?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, because that was just part of it. You just picked up the pole and camping, you went fishing, and there were so many locations right around us, and everybody knew each other. So it wasn't like you were going to get shot if you went on their property. They knew who you were. You just, hey, I'm going to go fishing. Okay, go ahead. That's the type of community we had. And it was just, I long for that today still in my heart, just that sort of freedom that we had in community. I was talking to somebody the other day, a relatively new friend, and we were just chatting. He's like, Todd, it sounds like you had like a Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer sort of childhood. And I'm like, yes. I said, that is absolutely what I had. I mean, we were just barefoot going down by the river and just living life, enjoying nature. We weren't worried about the things that I think kids are forced to kind of worry about today and think about so early. And I think that what makes all of us as part of Gen X, like I shared with you yesterday, Mike, I feel like Gen X is still going to save the world. No one believed it when we were skateboarding and doing everything else that we were doing that wasn't productive. And now I think we're the last hope of this country. I mean, it's just, I'm being facetious a little bit, but that's kind of truth. I kind of, man, family wise, I was raised by the pack. Parents were working all the time. Unfortunately, of course, part of that situation was I had an older brother. He's 6 years older than me. There was no real connection there. He was so bitter and resentful about things that happened in our family that we just never had the opportunity to really form a lasting bond as brothers should. But that was met by my friends. I would say, that friend group at that time, we still communicate. And it was just such a formative time in my life that those guys really became a big, my family.
Right.
And then, when my parents came to faith later on, that began to change. And thankfully that began to change. But I don't know, the having kind of that free willing lifestyle to do whatever you want, whenever you want. I think it affected me later in life in the sense that I can see where I had some trouble adjusting to one of the things I tried to do in life, which we'll get into in just a second, and then why I feel like I'm such a fit for the entrepreneurial space now. And I wish I would have understood that later or I wish I would have understood that earlier about myself. But, sometimes you just don't know until, it's revealed to you, and you just got to be ready to pivot when it is.
Yeah, man, I had my own little pack and crew, and it was the same thing on a Saturday or Sunday. It was 8:30. You're on your bike heading to somebody's house, and then you're gone. You're scrounging for food in somebody's cabinets, and then you end up being home by, I don't know, 7, 8 o'clock, just because. And my parents, my mom was like, never asked questions of what we did. It was just well, I'm glad you made it home.
Right. Maybe a couple of bruises and scuffs, right. But you're still alive.
And we were so observant, like we were so scrappy, and we could see things. And I think now that we're parents, kind of like what you said earlier, it's hard for us because we were so we had to fend for ourselves, and we had to know what's going on all around us because, skateboarding and cars and all kinds of stuff. Yep. That I don't know if that became the helicopter parent as of our generation, some of us, because we were so in tune with what was going around with it. We see our kids and they're like, what's on my phone? Check out this Snappy Snap. And I'm like, I ain't got time for all that.
Right.
Okay, so you're Tom Sawyering it, hucking around everything in the woods.
Yep.
And then you get to high school. What did you do? What were you doing in high school?
Oh man, I tried sports. I did play football. I played baseball, and it just wasn't hitting with me. I actually played baseball, since little league. Like as far as back I can remember, I always loved baseball. And I think once it got to high school, and it was just like so super competitive, it was no longer fun anymore.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's a flaw in my character. If it's not fun, I'm done. And I wanted it to be fun, and it became work.
Yeah.
And I was like, and that was like a part of my kind of freewheeling, undisciplined lifestyle. It's like, forget this.
Yeah.
And I think around that same time, you mentioned, getting influenced by different bands and musicians. It's when I was 14, I picked up the guitar, and I actually started on drums. And like you, I'm like, God, I'm horrible at this.
Yeah, let's no longer suffer. Hey, y'all. I just want to make an observation. When I see someone going through a legal situation, it seems like there are way too many unknowns. Well, the Allen firm provides legal guidance so that you can make a great decision, come to a resolution, and be at peace. For more information about the Allen firm, visit allenlawfirm.com.
And it wasn't fun for anyone. So,
right.
Actually, my friend Seth, he had the drum kit and a guitar, and I started on drums. He started on guitar, and we were just like, this isn't working. He was not diving on the guitar, and I wasn't getting the drums. And so we swapped. It was like, this, and it was like immediate, like connection. I get this. And so that's what really, so I turned to music, and I'd done some music in high school, played saxophone. I actually really loved that instrument. But guitar became a thing for me, and that became a really important part of my identity during high school. And a part of it, when I look back, and maybe someone's listening and they can identify with this, I think when we were growing up, we were really pushing boundaries in a lot of different ways. I wasn't pushing boundaries necessarily in a immoral way. I was pushing boundaries against like maybe what we would call some established things that were just rules. And why are they rules? They're just rules. You know what I'm saying? And they're just rules. And one of those sort of perceived rules of that area, that culture was, hey, you grow up, you at least get through high school, then you go to the factory to work. Right. And you work there for 40 years and then you die.
Like a blue collar only kind of vision.
That was kind of the vision. So I think early on, one of the things I felt in my life was I was I had this creative, sort of freewheeling entrepreneurial bent early on. And I can look back now and see that. But even 10, 15 years ago, I didn't see that in myself. I didn't understand that about myself. But one of the messages that I think came through all these different, I would say, institutional type of things, even my family, was stop dreaming.
Right.
Stop dreaming. You're never going to be this. There's a lot of negativity in my life and a lot of people telling me you're never going to be this. So just go get the job at the factory. Stop dreaming.
Well, that kind of went against us as a whole, as a generation, because we were like full of dreamers.
Right. So it's like, go work for the man, do your 9 to 5 and come home. And I think looking back on it now, I know that was a part of my life, and I've had a conversation with my parents. So I'm like, you just got to, they're of course they're different people now, and that they grow too. And they're like, man, you guys were so negative when I was growing up. I mean, it was like it was awful. I wanted to go to the Air Force, and my mom was like, "You're not smart enough."
Oh, dang. Yeah, right.
Or she was scared, and that's part of her thing, from her life. And she was like, "You're too tall to fit into a jet. They're never going to let you pilot anything." And I'm like, "Dang, there goes that dream." You know what I'm saying? I didn't know. I bought it.
Yeah, for sure. You bought into it. Okay, so you mentioned your parents, and earlier you said that they had kind of found their faith later. Was that in this high school, or was that even later?
That was that was a little bit earlier, before high school. They came to faith, and it took me about another 2 years, and just a hilarious kind of providential situation that occurred because let me just say this about faith. Talk about my brother and my mom and my father divorced. Yeah, and I think I was 3, but my brother was older, right? So he remembers all that. I don't really remember it. I remember like the vision of driving away, looking out the rear view. I mean, it's like such a movie.
Like a movie, yeah.
Movie. Like that's like one of the only things I remember was I see driving away from that house where we were a family and looking out the rear of the car and crying, but not knowing what was going on. Right. And then not seeing my dad again, I think for maybe 13 years or 10 years. And that was tough. My mom eventually remarried, and that was tough. I mean, man, I don't want to get too personal with the family stuff because I don't want to out things that happened early in our family, but it was dysfunctional for sure. It's one of the reasons I stayed away from the house as much as I could. And so it was a hard situation to be in. There wasn't really a whole lot of parental support early on. That changed when my stepfather came to faith. And that all happened really out of a tragedy with his mother, who was a very strong believer, a wonderful, wonderful lady. And I think one of the first people in my life that I think our family had gone to church some, right. And as a matter of fact, this is part of the story. My grandmother would call on Saturday night and say, "Okay, y'all going to church with me tomorrow, right?" And my parents would be like, "Nope, we'll send Todd." And so Todd got sent out the door at 9 a.m. for Sunday school. Yeah. And I resented it. I hated it. I was so mad, and I remember, like, on a personal level, sitting, I think I remember where I was sitting. I was sitting on this pile of gravel at the end of one of my friend's driveways. And I was like doing the whole Huck Finn, putting them together. Yeah, Huck Finn, chewing on a piece of grass. And I'm like, God, let's make a deal. You stay up there and I'll stay down here and we'll be good. That's really what my attitude was for like 2 years. Come to find out later, you're constantly transgressing against God, because even though I'm in creation and I'm enjoying it, I'm still a trespasser.
Yeah.
Right. I'm a transgressor. So there was no way for I'd already violated that covenant that I was trying to make with God.
Yeah.
And so my parents came to faith. They began to make adjustments, and it was something I saw. It was hard to deal with, honestly, because they were, I think, truly repentant. And well, I know they were, and it changed the nature of our household. I remember walking in, and my father-in-law, my stepfather was pouring all his alcohol out that was in the house.
Right.
And I was like, okay, what the heck is going on? I don't have any beer to steal anymore.
Yeah, right. This is affecting me now.
Yeah, that's right. So, oh my goodness, memories. And so those types of things, like behavioral things, and then them going to church, and they didn't necessarily force me to go to church initially. My mom just pleaded with me to go a lot, and I was like, no, I don't need that. And it came down to a youth event. This Nazarene church was having out in the sticks, and the church that my grandmother went to. Again, she was an extremely faithful believer. She passed away, and that's what I think caused my stepfather to really reflect on his life. He became a believer. I think my mom had been for a while, but she couldn't really practice her faith because of my stepfather at that time, and they started going to church. And this youth evangelist came to this Nazarene church. I mean, this is the 80s, man, youth evangelism and revivals and all that. In Georgia, it was still a thing. And it was still riding on the coattails of Billy Graham in the 50s and 60s and 70s.
Sure.
And she said, hey, Todd, we need you to, this is great. They're doing this, they're doing music. They have guitars and they have this, and they're doing it this way. And they had puppetry, and they had all these like kind of things that churches weren't doing at this time. So it piqued my interest, but not enough to go. And I think by the third day, she kind of started playing a game, and I have to commend her for this. She's like, hey, Todd, don't you like this girl? So-and-so? I'm like, yeah, I had some interest in her. Why?
That's funny.
She's been coming to church this week. Her and like 3 or 4 other girls I've heard you talk about. I'm like, oh, really? So, let me check this out. So I ended up going, and of course, met the girls. That was amazing.
Right.
But then by the end of that, I came to faith. There was just such a call in my life to faith that it was truly a moment of Jesus Christ revealing himself. It was no longer just a preacher saying words. It was no longer just scripture reading. It was no longer just singing a song. It was Jesus Christ through the gospel in a way that I could relate to, revealing himself to me in a real way. And that's when I truly repented and came to faith in that moment. And so that what ended up happening was Norris, he was just a fantastic man, a great pastor in and of himself. He became a youth pastor at that church, and then just like a youth movement happened out of that church into that community, which I was a part of, and I'm very proud to say that I'm a part of. It really fit in with kind of what I was talking about, this kind of free-willing thing from my youth. It was truly a movement. No one was like in charge of it, and so many of my peers came to faith during that time. It was just Manchester for a time, Manchester, Warren Springs area. We just saw God move in a really incredible way. Norris's son, Brian, became a lifelong friend. He was a bass player and guitar player already. And so Seth, Brian, myself, we ended up forming a band and became pretty popular in the Georgia circuit, amongst churches. And we did that for like 3 years, traveled, played, and we were cutting edge, which was also kind of fitting in with that personality, right? We had these Baptist churches and these churches saying, we're not supposed to have drums in church.
Right.
So for all of you who have worship music and drums and guitars in your church today, you're welcome.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I took the heat for it.
Were you playing were you dressing up in yellow and black and doing like Striper covers and Petra? And
we did Petra, and we did do Striper only because our lead singer didn't. He couldn't pull any Michael Sweet, so he wasn't. And well, I probably couldn't play Michael Sweet guitar at that level at that time yet. So
right, that's funny. So would you say that this event was the catalyst for, your kind of direction in the church? Arena that you went to, just that one thing?
Yeah, definitely.
That's so amazing that. Yeah. And we talk about it and we see examples all the time. We just don't ever highlight them, that it's one event that can change the whole trajectory of your life.
Yep.
It's crazy how.
I can definitely see that. And I can see sort of the providential work of God in that. I can also see some things in which I didn't have the people in my life who really knew what to do with me still.
Right.
They didn't really know how to cultivate kind of this hellion and this Tom Sawyer type of mentality. I was a maverick. I'm still a maverick. I am a non-compliant person by nature, and I am going to question everything. But that's what makes my faith strong, and that what makes me it helped me later on when I did go into full-time ministry as a pastor, and that's like that journey right there is just kind of crazy in and of itself, how all that materialized and happened and that calling happened. So I was actually playing guitar because that's what I wanted to do for the Lord, right, where I felt like I needed to go into full-time ministry, the pastoral ministry. And I wasn't happy about that, honestly.
Unstuck Coaches hates it when movement and progress in a person's life or business is stuck, or frozen, or slowed, or just stopped altogether. Well, we have found a solution. Unstuckcoaches.com. They offer a variety of coaching services to get you or your business moving again. Check out unstuckcoaches.com.
So you're playing these gigs, and then, of course, you don't want to work in the factory because that's not your vision. So then what's next? Do you go to college? Do you find a girl?
Yeah, met a girl.
Okay.
So I dropped out of high school actually in 10th grade. It wasn't for me. I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't being productive. I hated it. I hated every moment of it, other than the social life. And the social life totally kept me from being productive on the academic side. And even as a Christian, and we were popular too. Like we were extremely popular in our high school because we had a band and we were traveling. We were using it, right? Like weekends, we were at churches and playing like all weekend and doing those types of things. So we were popular. But on the academic side, I just wasn't feeling it. And that had been going on for a long time. And that's probably part of the undisciplined part of my life. And I can't remember what grade it was in, probably 5th grade or something like that. I barely passed. And the reason I barely passed was because I was over and skip days. And at that time, you could miss like 25 days.
Right.
And no one would say anything. You wouldn't get a letter home. Maybe at day 15, you'd get a letter home.
Yeah.
It's not like today, your child was tardy. You get a text, like, oh my gosh.
Yeah,
no.
For sure.
My mom looks at the report card. She's like, you were absent 30 days.
Yeah. In 6 weeks?
Yeah. Like, yes, mom. Yes, mom. That is correct. Sorry. And I barely passed 5th grade because of that, and I just didn't like the academic thing that was going on. And I wasn't doing good in 10th grade. I barely passed 10th grade, so I quit. And actually, 11th or 12th grade, I put myself through homeschool. My parents couldn't do it, but I was playing around too much. And then I figured out when I was homeschooling myself that I could get everything done in 4 hours that was taking 8 hours in a normal school day. And I'm like, oh heck,
yeah,
I can do this. And so it forced me. One of the things it motivated me to get discipline and learn how to study and get discipline so I could get those 4 hours done and then have the rest of my day for guitar and work. Right.
Yeah.
And so that ended up being like such a blessing in my life. So here I am high school dropout, homeschool myself. Those skills I developed in those last 2 years totally changed my academic outlook when I eventually went back to college. So, and I was the first, just crazy thing, I was the first person in my family to graduate from a 4-year college.
Wow. And you homeschooled yourself.
And I homeschooled myself.
Wow.
Yeah. So homeschooled myself. I was working at McDonald's. That's where I met Kelly, who's, Kelly. We've been married this year 30 years. So we were high school sweethearts. Her dad was a pastor.
Is there a thing called homeschool sweethearts? I'm just joking.
Probably.
Yeah, there you go.
Probably. But just a crazy, fun story about how we ended up dating and God just working through us, because her mom had told her before, because she had been homeschooled, I don't know, since she was like in 5th grade. So her mom just had to sit down. You're going to go to McDonald's and it's the real world, and there's going to be people there who are sinful. Right. This whole talk. And one of the first people she meets, and this is like, we had been in the band and part of this movement for a long time, as far as worship and seeing a lot of kids come to Christ, or rock band, and seeing a lot of kids come to Christ.
Right.
I had my Bible at McDonald's. I'm on break, and the first time I see Kelly, she walks in and she just stops. She's like, oh.
Right.
And I have my Bible open. I'm like, hey, are you new? And she's like, yes, I am. I'm new. Are you reading your Bible? I'm like, yeah. So she got to go back, and tell her parents, hey, guess what? You're wrong. There's a guy reading his Bible
right.
in the break room at McDonald's. And but then they found out later that obviously I was a fake Christian, because I had long hair and played in a Christian rock band.
You
right.
Plugged in your guitar.
Yep. So I had to go through this whole proving grounds to their family, but it was just a great, great time. And, we got married early. Actually, I graduated about 6 months early, crazy enough, like homeschooling, graduated 6 months early, and went to college, first year of college, because by that time I was thinking I was going to pastoral ministry. And I felt I had a calling for ministry. I didn't know how to identify it. I really didn't have people in my life to kind of, like I said, steer this anti-establishment dreamer
right
through what that could look like. And there was really only one path back in that day, right? You feel called, you better be a preacher.
Yeah.
And so that's all I knew. But I went to college right after high school. And man, I hated it, because I went to this very fundamentalist college and had to cut my hair, wear slacks every day. And that's like all this stuff, this traditional stuff. And I'm like,
everything that you don't go for.
Oh man. After I just like, okay, I'm going to force myself through this 3 months, just 3.5 months, and get through this first semester. And I am out of here. And literally the day I took my final exam and my last class, I went and handed my key in, and I'm like, I'm gone. I'm out of here. And I drove home. And I did. I went and got the job at the factory. But part of that was because I had asked Kelly to marry me. And again, I was like, 18 and a half at this point, about to turn 19. And her dad said, well, you got to get a job. And he thought it was going to take me a year to get a decent job. And I went out and had a job within a week.
Right. That's what he was hoping for.
Yeah. I had a really good job. And so I came back and I'm like, hey, I got hired and I have this job and we're going to be good. It pays well and just that. And so at that point, he had no other. He couldn't keep telling me no, because he had run out of reasons to tell me no.
Right.
And but he did make me write like a. And I give him a hard time about this still today. He did make me write like a 5-page paper on marriage and Christian marriage, and we still give him a hard time. So,
do you have it framed in your house? So
we have it somewhere.
You should roll that out ridiculous. As an anniversary gift sometime.
And I think one of my punchlines was, I thought I was being a little smart punk, but I was like, it's better to marry than to burn. I was trying to give him some hints that it's going to happen.
Yeah.
No, it's going to happen because the burning's there.
That's funny. All right. So you get this job. and you've proposed to Kelly.
Yeah.
And then what all happens for you to start doing the ministry, and then kind of how did you end up in Texas?
Okay, so I was doing, man, we were very active in our church. We'd actually planted a church. The youth pastor Norris, he planted a church in one of the main areas of Manchester. My family was integral in planning that church, and just being involved in that whole process at such a young age. And Norris was such a positive influence on me, honestly, because he was a maverick as well. Like, he was not liked by the establishment kind of traditional church, because he was doing all these things that they also thought were like not scriptural, not spiritual, not holy, all these things, but he was reaching kids, and he just got kind of tired of fighting kind of the institution. And he's like, I'm just going to go plant my own church. And that was a time when church planting really wasn't a thing.
Right.
There was no support for church planners back in, I would say this is probably 89, 88, 89, 90, probably 90.
No acts or no groups to help fund you.
No. So if you're out on your own. And it truly was an act of faith. And I just remember so many positive things happening. Still part of the movement. We're seeing like still tons of people come to faith, and it has such a powerful effect on your life. And sometimes I think I overthought my role in that, in the sense that I may have misinterpreted my call, or how I should use my call, based on how effective we were, when honestly that was truly just a movement of God that I happened to be a part of.
Right.
And so we ended up building, buying property, building the church. I remember I remember out there scraping the foundation, laying the brick, watching them pour the foundation, doing the plumbing, doing electrical, building it.
Full hands-on kind of church planting.
Yeah, man, you do it all. And I mean, I was probably 17 at the time, right? When all this happened, 16, 17. So anyway, I come back from that horrible semester from college, just jumping ahead, and asked Kelly to marry me. We're married six months later. I'm working at this job, and honestly, it was a really good experience. I talked about the factory and that type of thing, but for the first time in my life, some of my other skills started coming out. One of those skills I really had was I have a really strong mechanical aptitude, and I like to pull things apart, look at them, what part can be replaced to make this whole thing better, and put it back together. And I began to use that in this factory, just doing it just because, the job required it. And I advanced through this company really quick, like 6 years. I went from like the lowest, basically floor sweeper, to I had over $200 million worth of equipment under me. I had engineers coming out and asking me, hey, how does this work? And I was in automation, so pneumatics, hydraulics, electronics, automated systems, robotics. I loved it. I really had some fulfillment there, and thought I would be doing that. As a matter of fact, the engineers came to me and said, Todd, you already have all the knowledge. You just need a degree. So that's when I started thinking about going back to college. And this was like 5 years into this. So by this time, I'm like 23. And they said, you got the aptitude. You need to go to college. And here's what we're going to do for you. They literally had this thing lined out to where they said, we're going to send you to, I think, Columbus State University. We want you to get your electronics degree. And this is what we're going to pay you every semester. This is what we're going to cover. And this is what your salary is going to be when you graduate. And I was like, dang.
There you had it all worked out for you.
Yeah, they did. And I'm like, dang, that is awesome. And so I started seriously thinking about that, looking into it. And I started actually taking some courses, and some online, or they weren't even online courses at the time. They were courses that were mailed to you, like homeschooling. Right? So I started going through all those, just doing some of that. And as I was doing that, I just kept hearing this prompting in my heart and my spirit saying, if you go back to college, you need to go back for me. And I resisted that. I'm like, nope, not hearing that right now. And it was just consistent though. I would literally shove the stuff aside, and the engineers would come back out and say, "Hey, Todd, have you made a decision yet?" And I'm like, "No." Well, hey, man, you need to make a decision. We're all behind you. We want to see you succeed in this, et cetera, et cetera. I even got around that same time, one of the engineers was breaking off to start his own business, and a Russian guy. He was so freaking hilarious. I love working with this dude. And he said, "Todd, I want you to come work for me, and I'm going to start you off at this. I don't even need you to have a degree." So I'm like, "Hey, man, that's pretty cool." So I started considering that, and I'd start considering that and the thing the company was offering. And I just felt the prompting, hey, if you're going back to college, you're going back for me. So I couldn't make a decision.
Right.
Because every time I would want to make the decision, because I really wanted to do the other thing, God was there saying, if you're going to do it, you need to do it for me. And I finally gave in to that. I think I was 25. We had just had Rachel, our first daughter. She was 6 months old. And we literally just sold everything to go back to college. And the thing that made it the most just, I don't want to say insult to injury, but
right.
I went back to that same school that I hated. But they had changed safely. They were not so stodgy.
Right. Ridgy.
They were so stodgy and ridgy by that time. So it was a much different experience. And there was a good married student community there. So that really helped do that. And the thing, I see God's grace in that. And I'll just say this, anyone that's listening, because there's some other things we'll talk about as far as ministry probably, and why I left ministry, for people to think about who are considering it. But the thing that I saw, and the crazy thing was, I made that decision. We moved to Northeast Georgia, and I went to Toccoa Falls College, a private Christian school. And within 6 months, my father-in-law, who also worked for this company, he was a truck driver. He called me. He said, "Todd, you'll never believe what's happening." And I'm like, "Yeah, tell me." He's like, "They are selling the company, and the majority of the manufacturing is going to be moving to Mexico and China."
Wow.
So God spoke to my heart. He's like, and we were like, man, we left a pretty good living for a young couple at that time. And we were almost destitute. We were very poor now, trying to make our way through college. And it just dawned on me that man could have never kept his promise to me.
Yeah.
But God can. And man, I'll tell you, those 4 years as married students was tough. And in some ways, we've never recovered financially from all that we sacrificed to go
right.
to go to college when we did as a family, and then have 2 other kids while we were there. I mean, it's nuts, just the way it's kind of that maverick thing, the nutty.
Yeah.
You pay for it a little bit, because it's hard. But I also see this, because I was able to hone these skills, these outside the ministry. Please hear me. I hope anybody's considering ministry, I think my biggest pet peeve now is, before you ever step foot in a church ministry, you need some real skills, because there's going to be times in between churches or ministries that you've got to provide for your family, and you're going to need to rely on those skills. And because I had that, 5-6 years of experience,
right,
I was able to provide for the family, go to school full time. I was able to do contract work for companies that needed people like me to come in and fix equipment. And it's what got us through. We barely got through, but it's what got us through. And it's what has helped us through in other tough times, in between churches, in between ministries, or in ministries when I needed a little extra income. Those real world skills, I would say, man, you've got to develop those. You've got to have those in your back pocket.
Yeah, I think that goes back to what you were saying earlier, is your analytical side and your mechanical side to pull apart things and redo them. That wasn't a learned thing. I mean, it was learned throughout your childhood, probably dissecting bicycles and
Yeah.
what things. God has given us all of these tools already in us, and we may not know what they're for, and we may not know what to do with them.
Yeah.
Like, I was so obsessed with being in bands and thought I was going to be the next Garth Brooks, and then I was like, oh well, I'm tired of being on the road, so now I'm going to be a producer. Well, I went to school to be an audio engineer and did all this other stuff, thinking I was going to come back to Austin and work in like Willie Nelson's studio or Asleep at the Wheel. I was going to go learn from those guys. And then I come back, and of the 27 studios, there's only 4 left. And all of those guys are like, I got guys that used to own studios in here. So, and I couldn't even work for free. They wouldn't even let me come in the midnight shift for no pay to learn. Lo and behold, the Connection Church is starting at a elementary school across the street, and not that they needed help, but I figured, oh, I can go use this for my resume.
Mm-hmm.
I can go use all these skills I learned at school. And then that turned into, as you know, worship leading and running sound and all of these other things that I never, ever, ever would have thought I would use for ministry. It's just amazing to me that we, like you said, you don't necessarily need a degree at times, but you need to figure out something else to do with the skills that God has given you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Man. Okay. So you're doing the college thing. Kind of move us to how you got to Texas and all of the fun there.
Well, I spent some time associate pastor one church right after college. It was a good experience. It was a church of 2,000, so it was like, my first rodeo in a what they would consider a large church at the time, or even today, and it was a good experience. I learned a lot of valuable, like interpersonal type of, and I would say that's where I lacked the most initially, just like that interpersonal type of
Right.
relating. And because you don't have to talk to a machine, you just fix it. And
sure.
when you're outside and in creation, and you got only 2 or 3 people around you, it's kind of, you're building that relationship around those activities or whatever. And so I would say I was seriously lacking in that area on the interpersonal skills. So I will say this for ministry, that it advanced that part of me that God knew I needed to work on. I mean, I literally got thrown right into the place where you're going to develop it's the most leadership intensive job you can have. And I say that because you don't have leverage over anyone. You don't have a paycheck you can threaten people with. You don't have, the 6-month review coming up. It's all volunteers, and it's a totally different test of leadership. And in some ways I passed, in some ways I failed. So, and I'll just leave that there.
Right. Yeah.
I left that church and went pastor a church in South Atlanta. And so from associate pastor to pastor, 5 years there. And at the end of the 5 years, there was actually a guy that had moved out from Texas. I was in a Baptist church, so he was doing the associational missionary thing. Of course, I was working with him, and just, again, I think it was the church in South Atlanta that I really, really began to feel like I'm painted into a corner here. Like
right.
That kind of free
Maverick.
spirit, that maverick thing, entrepreneurial thing was coming out because I was trying to advance some things that there was constant resistance. And it was more about just people used to a traditional way of thing. And we got some things adjusted, some things changed, but I was feeling that maverick spirit again, feeling painted into a corner. And I was like, dang, is this all pastoral ministry is? Like just Sunday to Sunday. Now, I love preaching. I love the communication and teaching because it kind of met almost that mechanical aptitude where you pull things apart, look at the pieces, put them back together, and then present it in a way that people can understand, right? Because that's one of the things I was doing at the end for the engineers is I was writing all of these manuals on how to repair things and how to do things. And it just was so fitting to like take that skill and now use it for scripture after, all my college college ministry, my college experience. So I was feeling that maverick tug, and I was just getting tired of the day-to-day pastoral ministry, honestly. And Kelly and I, the way we describe it at that time, that God just made us so uncomfortable because all our family was in Georgia, was we just had the perfect storm of events happening in our lives. And that perfect storm was extreme financial difficulty. It was emotional difficulty. It was just constant physical issues. It was relational issues, not in our family, but things emerging in the church that should not have ever been real issues that became issues, right? And then just our kids, there were just these 5 things just hit us, and were just constant, and it got us uncomfortable. And again, that maverick spirit's coming up in my heart. So this person had actually started a church in Texas, and the pastor of that church was going to be going to the mission field. And he was like, Todd, he knew intimately what I was dealing with. Like, he was a close friend. And I'm like, and I was telling him all this, and he said, have you ever thought about church planning? I'm like, yes, I have, actually. There's a church in Texas I helped start. Would you consider going and pastor that church and helping them? They're going to need a lot of help because they're only 3 years old. And that really resonated with me, because that was the entrepreneurial thing I was looking for. That was the creative thing that I was looking for. That was the no longer battling the traditions and trying to maintain all this established stuff, and then just add, add some sprinkle some evangelism on top of it. It was, oh, we're going to be out. We're going to be doing this. We're going to be reaching a community. We're going to be able to establish the culture of this church. And, all those things appealed to me greatly. So we visited, they liked us, we liked them, blah, blah, blah. And we ended up just like relocating, I still believe today a total God thing, but Harvest, the church, pastors typically get like a year honeymoon period.
Yeah.
And I tell people I had like 3 months, and all hell broke loose in that church.
Yeah.
It was such in shambles when I came out. And everything from like 6 months into 3 months into it, people were just like, there's this big group of people. So what happened right before I came was the previous pastor relocated the church, and they went from a rental space where the church was set up already to a school space where they were having to set up every week.
Like a portable church. And
no one in the church wanted to do that. No one wanted to serve. No one wanted to help in that way. It wasn't part of the culture. It wasn't part of the service spirit that was there. They were just used to coming to church, plopping in the seat, and getting up and leaving. And there's all types of things that were just wrong. And we did a lot of investigation before we moved out here. We wanted to know everything that we could, and everything looked good as far as, I guess, on paper or from the sentiment of those that we interviewed about the church. And anyway, 3 months in, like a group of 30 people just approached me and said, hey, we're leaving. Because they moved from one town to another, and it was just 15 miles too far for them to drive now.
Right. And
so it was like, this isn't our community. We're not coming here anymore. It's not you, Todd. It's not personal. We're just leaving. So there's the first whammy 3 months in. 6 months in, I get approached, and the person is now doing the finances just said, Todd, we don't have any money. I'm like, what do you mean we don't have any money? Because I was doggone sure to make sure I wasn't the person in charge of finances.
Right.
I wanted a team or a person, someone that if anything ever happened, my honors and character's intact, and no one can make any type of accusations about embezzlement or whatever. So I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, yeah. And then come to find out that the previous pastor was, how should I say, because they were still under the tutelage or guidance of the associations and everything, and they were still having to do reports to them. There was no money stolen, but how money was moved around within the accounts to make it look like it was doing better than it was.
Got you.
And so that's what we found out was going on. So we were not as well established as we thought we were. And there were just a plethora of issues, other issues that came up. There was like people who were homeschool only, and we had a large, and so had about 50-50 of those who remained that were, homeschool, public school, and they were fighting with each other, a lot of infighting. We finally started making some ground in the new location. We got some things organized, and again, because I had all of this travel experience with the band, I knew about sound systems. I knew how to set them up. I knew how to simplify them, and so we did all this. We made it like really easy to set up. We just started tackling some of these issues. We started seeing some people from this new community come in, and we were getting busy. We were getting full again. Praise God. And I literally had this guy standing in the foyer, supposed to be welcoming people into the church. And he was one of these homeschool only dads. And he literally stood there while all these new people are coming in, and almost at the top of his voice said, "I can't wait until this is a homeschool only church and all these people aren't here."
Yeah.
And I have never lost it as a pastor like I lost it that day. Now, I'm sure I reacted probably too strongly,
right?
Because it ostracized the people. But I grabbed that dude and I'm like, those words better never leave your mouth again, because this is what the church and the gospel is about. These people who don't know him, not just your kids who are being raised in a Christian household. And so that tension was there.
Like almost for the rest of your time there.
The rest of my time.
Different parties.
Yeah. And it was just, we were about to really turn a corner. And unfortunately, because of the finance thing, one of the other things that hit me that made people mad was we didn't have the money to pay a staff person that was there. We had 3 staff people. Right. It's like, there's no money to pay this 3rd staff person. So we had to let him go. So of course people get mad about that. And then there's the other person who was full-time that had to be cut to part-time, and people were happy. So there was when I talk about this, this was a no-win situation for me coming in. I thought I was going to be coming into the situation, leading a group, and this is how the church was communicated to me. Yes, we are a church who wants to win souls. We want to change our community. We want to impact our community. So I'm coming in with that in my mind. And in reality, what it was a bunch of unhappy people who were unhappy with their previous churches, Christians,
correct,
coming to a new church, and with every group having their kind of established dogma and established traditions, which not only was in opposition to what a church plan is supposed to be, but also in opposition to one another.
Right.
And there was a nightmare. There was a nightmare.
Yeah, there's nothing that says Jesus less than what that guy said at the front of the building. And that mentality of like, we all have different expectations of what we need in order for this church to be successful, instead of saying, we're just supposed to talk about Jesus and find people and point them towards Jesus. That's it. Yeah. There's no other, everything else is just like, I forgot what the word is, like the way you like something. It's like the debate between rock music church and just acoustic. Those are just styles. Whether you like them or not, the principle is still the same. Let's find people who don't know Jesus, bring them into the building so Jesus can take over. Because we do nothing. I think some of it is that we are I used to tell people, we're like the ushers. No matter where you are in life, we're just supposed to bring people to him and he'll do the work. We're stuck in sometimes thinking that we are the people that do all of those things, right?
Yeah. or we're Judaizers, right? It's not just the gospel, it's the gospel plus. It's the gospel plus you got to homeschool your kids. It's the gospel plus you got to do this. It's the gospel plus you got to do that. And
Yeah.
that's where a lot of churches really, really screw up. They become Judaizers.
Yeah.
And they all deserve Paul's rebuke in Galatians of Peter. Where Peter was like, "Oh, when I'm with the Gentiles, I behave like I'm adjust to the Gentiles, but when the Jews show up, I start adjusting to the Jews and start not hanging out with the Gentile Christians." And then Paul said, "You hypocrite."
Yeah. Yeah. It's like
Here's
Enneagram 3, like the chameleon that just kind of moves with whatever they're like. Yeah. It's just, that just drives me crazy. All right. So you're in this, like, I'm well, I know, but all
this
of this
podcast is going longer than you
that's fine.
anticipated.
We're gonna go until we're done. The all of this emotional and craziness that you thought you had sorted out, that you thought you had done your due diligence, and yet all this chaos comes. I'm assuming that's the main reason of why you decided to step out of ministry. Yeah.
Well, I would say this. I think a lot of it was I went through a very strong period after I left that church of a lot of self blame and self condemnation for the condition of that church. And truly, I know in my heart I was not the fault. I was not the reason. Although there are lots of people in that church that still today would, or who were part of that church that still today would blame me and never look in the mirror. And I went through just so much self condemnation about what had happened during that time. But I just think it was. So I think there was two things. I think there was like a negative thing and a positive thing. So I kind of started looking at myself and thinking maybe I heard God wrong.
Right.
Maybe or maybe this pastoral ministry served a purpose in my life and other people's life, because again, in every ministry I was in, we had, even in this one, even throughout this difficult and this hardship, there are amazing, glorious things that only God could do. And I was a part of that movement of what God was doing, right? But I had so much of my identity wrapped up as a pastor from being full time for 15 years, and so much of that was there. But one of the things that happened, even like in about 2 years into the ministry here in Texas, was I started having to evaluate my heart because I was miserable, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I was absolutely miserable, and it wasn't just like it wasn't just because of the hardships we were going through the church. It was just something that I felt was still missing in my life. I was still feeling painted into a corner. I was still feeling like I couldn't spread my wings. I was I think this is the thing. I was forcing myself into a little square of what the expectation of your life should be as a pastor. And that expectation was not set by me, and it wasn't set by God. It was set by church people.
Right.
And that's distinguished church people from followers of Christ, because I had to meet an expectation of all of these things. And if I colored outside the lines, and man, I colored outside the lines even when I was a kid, I couldn't help it.
Right.
If I colored outside the lines at all, I was scrutinized. I was condemned. I was character assassinated. And coloring outside those lines, it was not like I was being immoral or stealing money or harming people or whatever. It was just looking at some of these ways and saying, hey, there might be a different way to approach this.
So just real quick, what advice would you have for somebody that's maybe a pastor or a worker that's kind of feeling the same thing? Like, I am the reason why all these things are happening when it's really not. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You have all these other, as you just said, you have all these other expectations. You have all of these demands put on you that are not of your will, not of God's will. What can you, other than, I mean, what would you do? What did you do? Did you just rely on God? Did you talk it out? Did you have some counseling? I mean,
Yeah,
some of
you
those
have to.
people that are struggling right now with that,
Yeah,
what would you encourage them would be like the first step?
I think you've got to most likely, you can't go to another pastor. You probably can't go talk to an established pastor because they're going to give you the same answer that I was given. Just be faithful. Just be faithful.
Right.
Got to work it all out. I mean, it could very well be that your time in ministry is done, and that's okay. And it's time to explore other options in the vocational field. Anybody that's listening, I want to tell you, I've done more ministry outside of ministry than I ever felt like I actually authentic ministry.
Right.
Than I ever did as a pastor. Now, we did great things. We saw amazing things. I established missions in one church that had never done missions in its history, 50 years of history. I've done great things, but I still feel like the most impactful things I've done have not been as a pastor or as a ministry staff person. Because then those things that I get to choose to be involved in, I believe are totally of God. And they're not forced. They're not an expectation from the rest of the church. And that's the hardest thing, I think, of being in ministry. It's not the expectations of the job description that are written down. It's the unspoken expectations of every church person you run into. And the opportunity to disappoint people in the church is enormous because of the unspoken expectations. And expectations that do not line up with Scripture. Expectations that are not required of us as pastors, but are truly more of a Western style cultural issue within the Western church. And I say you have to do a real heart to heart with yourself. You have to do some real self exploration and self awareness. If you've been in ministry like I was for 15 years and you step out, just know, unless you have connections, unless you have somebody who's going to help you, it's going to be hard for 3 years to make the transition. And if you're going back into corporate life or you're going, doing something, and again, that's where those previous mechanical skills allowed us to make the transition back out of ministry. My advice is you got to truly look and see. I think on a kind of fundamental level, there's this idea in the church for pastors. And it's all around like, Jesus' teachings on, give up your life, take up the cross and follow me, those types of things. And one of the things I realized as I'm going through this identity crisis after I left, resigned from the last church and left the ministry, it was the idea of that the Christian message on how we follow Jesus isn't replacement theory, isn't Jesus is just going to come into my life and then I'm going to be possessed by Jesus and I have to look like Jesus. That's true in the moral sense. And, some of the senses we understand it.
Right.
But how people expect it is that you don't get to be you any longer. And I realized that everything I was doing in pastoral ministry was so against who I was, not the sinful things, but just how I was wired.
Right.
That I was becoming miserable. And I was either going to make everybody, if I went to another church, I think immediately after that, I would have made that church miserable. Right. I would not have been helpful. And that was a super hard thing to realize and to admit. And then, so what do I do about this, man? I got coaches into my life. I had to pay for those coaches to help me. So you've got to be prepared to invest in yourself. And you need to have people that aren't just going to give you the Sunday school answer about life.
Right.
And thankfully I reached out and had probably 4 or 5 people in my life right before the church. I resigned from the church, but definitely after. And that's what had so much of what I'm doing now able to emerge in my life, like just going back to being a risk taker, going back to being entrepreneurial, going back to being creative, going back to just, hey, this is Todd Dionne.
Right.
I don't fit that little pastoral model. And one of the things that helped me understand that was I was going to a meeting. This was while we were still at the church here in Texas, and I was riding with another pastor, and he had so much joy in his heart. And I'm just like, I'm sitting over here, and I'm just like, oh, I'm weeping and gnashing of teeth, and I'm just
Right.
miserable. And I thought it was like me, I thought it was, like I said, I was so condemning myself. I thought it was just me, and this is what God wants for me now, and I'm just going to be miserable the rest of my life because I'm called in the pastoral ministry. I mean, we can maybe have another podcast on what
Right.
calling is and what that looks like and
Right.
what it can be, and that can change in your life. So, and I want to give permission to anyone out there that the calling it's not, how should I say this? It's not necessarily one dimensional all the time. It can change and it can adjust. And uh, I kind of felt God calling me back into like a vocational side of things. At the same time, I'm feeling miserable. So again, I'm getting uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Again, things aren't going well in this church. I'm blaming myself. That's not true. It's not true of you right now, unless you're just a scumbag, honestly.
Right.
Unless you're in there to just to extort people and be false and be a hypocrite and all those types of things. Most likely, if you're just genuine and wanting to serve people, those feelings you're having, those are just, first of all, they're probably some self issue, some self-awareness things that you need to work on with a life coach. And they're probably some, enemy things. You've had so many things spoken into your life from negative people in the church for so long, you're believing it about yourself right now. And that's something I had to work on, right? This negativity and this mindset that came out of 15 years in ministry. Unfortunately, and guys, this or listening or people, it can be extremely unhealthy and extremely toxic.
Right.
For leaders.
Yeah. And the cookie cutter kind of, if you are a Christian, you look like this, is not how, it's we're all beautifully made in however he wants to make us. We all have our skills. I think that's awesome that you found that you can be a super, you can just be the best Christian you can be and still be every part of you.
Yep.
Instead of having to reform yourself. I always think of like those little squishy blobs where you can manipulate them.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to be that. We can be the big squishy blob and be whoever God made us to be and still be effective in ministry and do amazing things without having to meet all these check boxes of the church.
Yep.
Church people, I should say.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about all the crazy things you're doing now.
Yes.
The Maverick Todd.
So I'm truly living my true self now. I hate saying that because it's so overused,
and it took you. And it always amazes me is around I won't say how old you are because you're still younger than me, but
6 months.
40, the 40 to 50-year-old is when they always call it midlife crisis, but I think at some point it's an awakening to be like, oh, I've spent the last 40, 45 years being not 100% me.
Yeah.
Now I'm flipping the switch, and either you love me or you don't love me.
Yep.
I don't care. I'm finally realizing this is who God has made me.
Yep.
And I'm going to be authentic to not only him, like you said, none of the sinful, immoral things, but I'm just going to be me. So let's talk about what you did, what you were doing now, and all of those things, because you're doing a lot of things.
Yeah, I have a lot of irons in the fire, so to speak, and it just meets so many needs in my life to have a lot of irons in the fire.
Sure, yeah.
It's just
the entrepreneurial part.
It's that freedom loving. I'm going to dip, and I'm dip into this, and I'm going to take risk, and that's just that's me. That's it may in some ways it may have been initially like a response to getting out of ministry, like, wow,
Yeah.
push back and maybe a little bit of an overreaction. But now, 5, 6 years later, I'm able to make the adjustment and I think use this wisely. And again, like you said, it was that 40 to 50-year-old. It was not in a midlife crisis. It was just, what do I want to do with my life and what really gives me fulfillment? And I think that's a question that is okay for every Christian and every pastor and every person that has a calling should ask, because it's not just purpose, because in the church world, purpose has been weaponized, and they will tell you your purpose in a heartbeat, and your purpose is to come serve my church every day of the week for free. Right?
Right.
It became about potential and fulfillment. And my coach helped me to understand this, and that it's not a sinful thing to ask. Here's the perfect example. Because we had struggled so long financially, when right after I resigned from the church, I wouldn't say right after. So it was a year transition after I resigned. And again, I leaned back on these mechanical skills. One of the things I went and did was I worked with a guy who was repairing these automated car washes. He had accounts all over Central Texas. So I'm driving all over Central Texas, repairing these and doing maintenance on these automated car washes. Like, doing something with my hands got my mind off of the stuff I was dealing with, right? Because I was seeing in ministry, you often have a start, but you never know when you're finished. I couldn't handle that. I realize that now. I realize I have to see a finished product. And so when you're doing mechanical stuff, it's broken and then it's fixed and it works. Yes. Yeah. Right. It's maybe 2 hours of work, 3 hours of work, and it's done. That rarely happens in ministry. So here I am. I'm kind of doing this work therapy,
right?
This manual work therapy after being a pastor. And then someone calls, and they say, "Hey, Todd, I think you'll be really good with this. Would you consider applying?" Just out of the blue, providential thing. Because I was really trying to figure out what I was going to go, what I was going to do, what was going to happen. And it was in real estate, and it was with a new builder in Central Texas, new construction. So I said, sure. And well, it actually took me about a month and a half to decide. And I applied, no response, called back, and then the person that originally hired me was like an assistant manager. Well, now she was the manager. She's like, "Todd, I'm so sorry. I've been in so much transition. Come up here again. I'm on interview." So I went up to the office, got interviews, and it was just like, "Hey, do you want this job?" I'm like, "Sure. Okay. You're hired." Because she knew me.
Right.
And so I started working with new construction. And again, traveling around Central Texas, these different, one builder, but different communities helping out. Got promoted there, opened up 2 communities here, or 3 communities here in Central Texas. And in 2 years after the church closed and I resigned, and then that church closed, I was making the most money I've ever made in my life.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, so this is what this is.
Yeah.
This is what all my congregants were experiencing, because they could go out, they could take trips, they could do this, they could do that, and they could send their kids to this college and that college. And we couldn't. That was honestly one of the reasons we transitioned and didn't go back in, was because of our children and what we would not have been able to accomplish what it was that they needed in their lives without me stepping away from ministry. And that was in some ways, that was a sacrifice for me, even though I started making a lot of money. It was still a sacrifice for me to step away from something that I had so much of my identity wrapped up in. But here's the thing. We had been struggling for so long. We now feel guilty as a believer, about making really good money.
Yeah, doing well.
And then now I'm having to deal with something else, like, oh, I'm doing well, I'm not struggling. Is this a sin for me to have this money? And it wasn't.
Right.
At all. It was a product of hard work and effort and diligence and learning a new trade. Well, I found out I love sales. a crazy thing, pastor going into sales. It happens a lot more than people think. But
Yeah.
I actually found something that met a lot of boxes and check marks in my personality with this new construction, being a builder, helping people. I was still able to serve people, able to minister to people in a very tangible way. I found fulfillment, like for the first time in 15 years, like real personal fulfillment. And not that pastoral ministry didn't do that, but it didn't do it in this same way. And
Right.
I had to struggle with my coach again, my business and life coach, who was telling me it's okay. This is what you wanted. This is what you've been working for. And this is okay. I had such an impoverished mindset that I had to renew my mind when it comes to what, finances, money. I had and it took another year to address that.
To feel comfortable and all that.
Yeah. So after the builder, and I got a taste of that, and how fulfilling it was natural for me to transition to being an independent real estate agent. So I did that, got my license, and it's just been a great experience so far. I love the freedom of it, kind of the maverick thing, right? I'm able to serve people and be in people's lives in a very meaningful way at very important times in their lives. So it's kind of like, and I found myself counseling marriages, and I find myself counseling people when it comes to finances and all this stuff, and they're open
right
to, and the thing is, I think this is the other part it hits for me personally, is that I'm not limited to a homogenous congregation that I'm preaching to every week and they all look the same. It's Indian clients, and it's young clients, and it's elderly clients, and it's, just people from all walks of life. All of a sudden I'm in their lives, and they are thankful, and I have influence, and I can just be a light to them who wouldn't have a light otherwise. So I think, so now real estate checks all those boxes in my life, where I feel this fulfillment of being involved in people's lives and seeing and having a result from it, like a reward from it. You know what I'm saying?
So you're doing that, and then you've teamed up with some doctors on some health stuff at a thing called Cryo 512.
Yeah.
And just go over that real quick of what that kind of, so that sounds like a totally something, your entrepreneurship into something that you have no idea really about.
Well, Kelly's my wife. She's been involved in it, with working for chiropractors for 10 years. And we love that side of the health field. We see the benefit of it. We experience the benefit of it. And then also this particular chiropractor, he also has part of his office, which is Cryo 512, the cryotherapy and everything else. Well, we came across this other technology, is FDA approved technology. It's one of the only FDA approved technologies in the US right now that is proven to cause subcutaneous fat loss. When you use this product, you're not just like you're in a sauna losing water weight. You're actually losing inches of fat, that fat resistant, that fat that's resistant to exercise and diet. That's,
at the
beer bellies
level.
and the cellular level stuff, cellulite. And we saw the potential in that, and we started researching. It's like, no one in Central Texas has this. It was a big investment up front. We had some money. We're going to invest in this, and let's go on. And we and the doctor went in half and half and put it under Cryo 512, and that's part of our health and fitness.
That's awesome.
Business. And I would, reach out to Cryo 512 in Pflugerville, Texas, and get you a free consultation. Come try it out. And you'll be really surprised. I mean, we have people lose up to 1 or 4 inches in one session. It is incredible, and it's non-invasive. It's wave pulse laser, so it penetrates all the way down to that subcutaneous fat level.
Yeah,
and it causes you to eliminate and remove that fat. Such a cool technology, and I don't know, we're thrilled to be able to offer that.
Yeah, we'll put the link into our show notes so that people can go check it out. And if you live in Central Texas, click on it, set up your free consult. Especially if you're struggling, this could be the jump start that you need, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you do you have your own podcast.
I have my, well, I
Let's talk
have a
about real
podcast.
estate ish.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm actually the host of Real Talk Real Estate, Austin Central, Texas. It's our brokerage, Hill International Realty, which is a boutique brokerage here in Austin Central, Texas. And man, we help all types of people find their next home, sell homes, or purchase a home. And that's higroup.atx.com. You can see about us. And and Mike, I know I'll provide you my personal website that's connected to HI Group,
Okay.
so that they can see that and see what I'm all about on there and read reviews. And you can go find me on Google and read Google reviews on the local business ads. So I'm easy to find if you start looking up my name. I mean, if you look up my name, I'm kind of fill up your first
Well,
page
we'll
of your
make it
Google.
easy for them and put some of these in the show notes. You actually have a bass. Is it a bass fishing? Is it just
Yes.
a regular fishing?
No, well, I do a little bit of everything, but I focus on bass fishing. I love bass fishing. It's the outdoor spirit that's in me, and I fish probably 3, maybe 4 times a week, just depending. And I'm always recording, so I'm like, why not just? If I love doing this, I'm just going to start a YouTube channel, so you can find that at Fish On with Todd Dionne. I thank my wife Kelly for that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's fledgling. I have 5 or 6 videos up. I got some more going to be posted soon. And people can, if they're interested in fishing and bass fishing, they can go check that out.
We'll
watch me lose some big ones and catch a few. And
that's awesome.
Some of the hilarities that go of just being out in nature.
We'll need to tag all of these fishing companies in it so they can try to get some sponsors for you.
Yeah,
so you can
man,
have, like,
that'd be awesome.
The vest with all the patches and stuff.
Give me some patches.
Yeah, right. All right, and I saved this for last. I don't think I've talked about it at all. Let's land the plane. Let's close the door on Todd Dionne, Texas Ranger, and just real quick, like the being a Christian in the film, movie, TV industry.
Yeah, that's going to surprise a lot of people. But yeah, this last year, season 3 of Walker with Jared Padalecki as Walker. It films here in Austin. I was able to get caught up with that production and be a featured ranger. I think out of the 17 episodes that they had, I was in 12 of them. It's just a great experience. And honestly, I would caution Christians about talking too harshly about quote unquote Hollywood. There is Hollywood that we would absolutely not associate ourselves. And then there's other aspects of it where there are a lot of Christians in this industry. And there are a lot of actors who are Christians who are very cautious on how they, for better or for worse, however you want to look at it. Some people would be judgmental of it, but I understand, and I've had the opportunity just to have conversations with these actors, some directors, assistant directors, people on the production crew. Just because you're there a lot, you get to know them, they get to know you. And honestly, it's part of that weird creative side of me that just loves doing this. Right before Walker, I was a part of, I do have an IMDb page, by the way. So maybe I'll link that to. There's some credits still hanging out there that haven't been posted yet, but you'll see I was in a part of The Sun with Pierce Brosnan in 2017. And then before that, The Leftovers on HBO. And that was just like really background work, but that what's got me introduced. And then I guess the first real credit is going to be the new movie that's coming out, Spy Kids Armageddon, comes out in August, where I was on set with Gina Rodriguez, the 2 Spy Kids, a lot because I was a photo double for Zach Levi. So Zach Levi, Shazam, and all these other things that he's done. And Zach Levi, great guy. He's a believer. I don't want to, he's outed himself. I'm not outing him, but just super, super nice guy. And it was a honor to kind of be in that position to fill in for him when he wasn't there. So I was like, I'll have all these shoulder shots and back of the head shots and all these other things where I'm actually, no lines, but I'm in the film often. I'll be in the credits on that one for sure. So
did you have to get a swole? Did you have to get all real big so your shoulders? Because after Shazam, he got kind of big.
Oh no, that's all puffy stuff in his suit, man. We're almost the same
Oh,
size.
same. All right.
Yeah.
That's funny.
But those are just things I'm enjoying doing right now. They aren't big money makers, especially with the writer's strike right now.
Right.
I'm doing lots of auditions for stuff, but everything's just like shut down at the moment.
Hold.
So yeah, I mean, there's not. Hopefully that doesn't affect us getting started season 4, because Walker got approved for season 4. But I'm afraid it's going to, and we're just going to be twiddling our thumbs when it comes to different things. Crazy thing about that, I'll just share like a backstory when I was way back in Warm Springs about how this was a part of my life early on, was that I was shy back then, and I was thin. Oh my goodness, tiny. I was always long and tall, but thin, not neat. And there was a casting company, and they were filming a film about FDR. And FDR has a little White House in Warm Springs. Like, that's the one thing that makes Warm Springs on the map, is that.
Right.
And they were doing a documentary or film about FDR, and they approached me. I don't know how I don't know, but they approached me and asked me to portray a young FDR. And I was just so shy. I was like, no. Well, like I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what that was all about. But that's just crazy, kind of coming full circle, that I had that type of opportunity early on, and now I'm able to just. It's hobbyish right now. I do acting classes. I have an acting coach. I'm doing different things to get better at that. Like anything else we need to do, we need to get better at something.
Right.
And but the people you're able to come into contact with, most of the people I've interacted with on the production crews, the directors, have been just really good people. Right. They may not be believers,
right?
But they don't have like impure motives to go destroy families or anything. They have a job to do, and they're trying to produce a great. They're trying to produce something good that people will want to enjoy.
Right.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the plane is landing because it's been an hour and 30 minutes. So sorry. I think I told you an hour. But,
you told me an hour. But that's all right. Hey, you were asking questions. I did a lot of the talking. Thank you, though. I do appreciate that.
Well, if you can, real quick, pray us out of this, and pray for maybe those that are listening, that something will encourage them, that there is hope even in the struggles, kind of thing.
Sure thing. Yeah, thanks for asking me to do that. Father, we just come to you right now. Thank you that we can have this conversation. All encompassing in a lot of ways. So many things aren't even covered here, but they are just snippets of your work, your providence in my life, and my response to that, and just how really life, business, and faith do come together in a real way, and how I truly believe now in my heart that you want us as individuals to not only just be in your will, but be fulfilled in your will, and use our skills, gifts, talents, and abilities in ways that maybe don't fit the norm, maybe don't fit what people think of us or think we should be. But we want to always do that in a way that honors you. And there are people out here that have listened. They've listened with intent, and there are things I've said that's resonated with them, and they need encouragement from you, and they need people in their lives to bring hope and positivity. They need things in their life to help them to renew their mind and understand that what you've done by regenerating their heart, that grace, just leaning on that gospel of grace, the good news of the good news, that it was your activity that saved us, and your activity that will continue, in a sense, saving us. That they would be able to lean on that and turn to people that they can hear from, and hear truth from, and hear reality from. And that you would reveal yourself in new ways to them through that. We just ask that in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. All right, buddy. Thank you for, again, taking the time. And for all those that are listening, we'll put all the things that Todd does. If you want to connect with him or ask him any kind of questions after that, we'll put those on the show notes. Thanks for the time, buddy.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this latest edition to the Storyfield podcast. We hope that you have been challenged, inspired, and ready to take that next step, whatever that is. If you know someone with an amazing story that needs to be heard, send us an email at info@thestoryfield.com. Have a fantastic day, and we can't wait for you to join us on the next episode of The Storyfield.